You won't believe how my life turned upside down over a set of windows. That's the only way I can begin this story because even now, it feels ridiculous. But trust me, what started as a home improvement project turned into a nightmare involving my HOA, a foreclosure notice, and even the sheriff knocking at my door. And yes, in the end, I walked away with $75,000. But the road to that victory, it nearly broke me. It all started on a warm spring afternoon. I was standing in my living room, sunlight spilling through the old wooden windows that had been there since the house was built. They rattled when the wind blew, leaked when it rained, and cost me a fortune in heating bills. I thought to myself, this is it. I'm finally going to replace them. So I called a contractor, got quotes, and like any good neighbor, I checked with my HOA first. I sent in the application with all the details, white vinyl windows, same style, just new material. A week later, I got the approval in writing. A big sigh of relief. When the new windows went in, I was thrilled. The house looked cleaner, brighter, more modern. My energy bills dropped. For once, it felt like I'd made a smart homeowner decision. But then, 2 months later, I got the first letter. It was a thick white envelope from the HOA, stamped urgent. Inside, in bold letters, it read, "Violation notice, unauthorized windows, fine, $250 per day." I thought it had to be a mistake, so I marched down to the HOA office, papers in hand. "Excuse me," I said, waving the approval letter, "you approved these windows." Behind the counter sat Karen Mitchell, the HOA president. She was the kind of woman who always wore a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She adjusted her glasses, looked at me like I was wasting her time, and said, "I don't know how that slipped through. Vinyl windows are not allowed in this community. You'll need to replace them immediately, or the fines will continue." My jaw dropped. Replace them? I just spent $10,000 on these windows, and I have written approval right here. Karen smirked. "Approvals can be rescinded. Rules are rules." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the fine notice. My hands were shaking with anger. How can they just change their mind like this? I thought. This isn't fair. I decided to fight back. I started attending HOA meetings, bringing my approval letter, showing it to the board. But every time I spoke, Karen shut me down. "The matter is closed," she'd say, tapping her gavel like she was some kind of judge. Meanwhile, the fines kept piling up. $250 a day, then $500, then more. Within 6 months, the total was over $12,000. I couldn't believe it. Over windows. Then came the day that nearly broke me. I was pulling into my driveway when I saw a bright red notice stuck to my front door. My stomach dropped when I read the words, "Notice of foreclosure." I felt my knees weaken. They were actually trying to take my house. Over windows they approved in the first place. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house made me jump. I kept imagining the sheriff showing up to throw me out. And sure enough, a week later, a sheriff's car pulled up outside my house. Sheriff Carson stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a look that said he'd seen it all. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I have to serve you with these foreclosure papers. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules." I stared at him, tears in my eyes. "This can't be legal. They approved the windows. I'm being robbed in daylight." He sighed. "Off the record, you might want to talk to a lawyer. HOA cases like this, they can get ugly, but sometimes people win." And that was the spark. Right then, I decided I wasn't going down without a fight. As the sheriff drove away, I clutched the papers in my hand. My world felt like it was crumbling, but deep down, a fire had started to burn. I whispered to myself, if they want a fight, they've got one. What I didn't know then was just how far this fight would go and how many secrets about the HOA were about to come to light. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that bullies don't back down until someone bigger stands up to them. That thought echoed in my head as I sat in my living room, foreclosure papers spread out on the table like some cruel game I never signed up to play. The sheriff's words replayed over and over. Sometimes people win. But how? I wasn't rich. I didn't have some big legal team. All I had was the truth, and that HOA approval letter. The next morning, I took a deep breath, put on my best outfit, and drove downtown to meet a lawyer. His name was David Klein, recommended by a friend who'd once fought her HOA over a fence and actually won. David's office was cluttered but warm. Stacks of files covered his desk, and behind him hung a framed degree from Harvard Law. He had the kind of calm, steady voice that made you feel like maybe, just maybe, you weren't crazy after all. "So," he said, adjusting his glasses as I handed him the foreclosure notice and the approval letter. "Let me get this straight. They approved vinyl windows in writing. You spent over 10 grand. Then months later they fined you $12,000 and started foreclosure?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Exactly. I feel like I'm losing my mind here. Can they even do this?" David leaned back in his chair and gave a little chuckle. "Oh, they can try. But what they're doing here, this is classic HOA abuse. And if what you're saying is true, we've got a strong case." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. David continued, "But these cases aren't just about rules. Sometimes they're about power. And HOAs like yours, especially with someone like Karen at the helm, don't usually play fair. You need to be ready for a fight." I swallowed hard. "I'm ready." A week later, David filed suit against the HOA for wrongful foreclosure, breach of contract, and fraud. That's when things really started to unravel. First, we requested documents, emails, meeting minutes, financial records. The HOA stalled, dragged their feet, and tried to bury us in paperwork. But buried in those stacks, David found something shocking. An email chain. It was Karen, writing to the other board members. "We made a mistake approving those windows. If we let her keep them, others will want the same. We need to make an example out of her, otherwise the whole community will start bending the rules." And then another reply from the treasurer. "Plus, the fines will cover our budget shortfall. We could use the money." My stomach turned as David slid the printed emails across the table to me. "They didn't just make a mistake," he said. "They planned this. They targeted you." At that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about windows anymore. This was about corruption, about power, about an HOA board willing to ruin lives for money. And then things got even darker. David explained, "I've seen this pattern before. HOAs sometimes push people into foreclosure just to buy back properties cheap and flip them. If they're funneling money around, this could be bigger than just your case." I frowned. "Are you saying this is criminal?" He nodded slowly. "It could be. And if it is, we might need to bring in more than just a judge." 2 days later, my doorbell rang. It was Sheriff Carson again. "Ma'am, I heard about your case. And let's just say your HOA has a reputation. You're not the first homeowner they've steamrolled, but you might be the first who actually fights back." I let him inside, poured him a cup of coffee, and told him everything David had uncovered. The emails, the budget shortfall, the plan to make an example out of me. Carson listened, nodding slowly. Then he leaned in and lowered his voice. "Off the record, if money's being mishandled, if fraud's involved, that's not just civil court, that's federal. You might be looking at an FBI case." My heart pounded. The FBI? Over my windows? But as crazy as it sounded, deep down, it made sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Karen, her smug smile at those HOA meetings, the way she acted like she owned the neighborhood. If the FBI really gets involved, I thought, Karen won't just lose her position, she could lose everything. The thought both scared and gave me strength. The next HOA meeting was chaos. David came with me this time, briefcase in hand. When I stood up to speak, Karen rolled her eyes. "Here we go again," she muttered. But David cut in, his voice sharp. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, we're here to inform the board that you are officially being sued for wrongful foreclosure, fraud, and breach of contract. And let me warn you, if the financial records we've requested aren't produced in full, we will have no choice but to escalate this beyond civil court." Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's face went pale. You can't threaten us like that," she stammered. David smirked. "That's not a threat. That's a promise." That night, as we walked out of the meeting, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone in this fight. But deep down, I knew the battle was just beginning. The HOA wasn't going to roll over quietly, and if the FBI really did get involved, things could get dangerous. They say power corrupts, but in my neighborhood, it wore lipstick, pearls, and a fake smile. That was Karen Mitchell in a nutshell. And the moment David filed our lawsuit, her mask slipped completely. The harassment started small. First, my mailbox went missing, literally ripped from the post one night. The next morning, there was a bright yellow violation notice taped to my door. "Homeowner is responsible for maintaining mailbox. Failure to replace within 48 hours will result in fines." I stood there in my pajamas, clutching the notice, my blood boiling. They destroyed it and then fined me for it? When I told David, he sighed. Classic intimidation tactic. Document everything, take photos, we'll use it in court. So I did. Every notice, every strange incident, every petty little jab. Then came the neighbors. People I'd waved to for years suddenly stopped saying hello. Some turned their backs when I walked by. Others whispered loud enough for me to hear. "She should have just followed the rules. Troublemaker." It felt like the whole neighborhood had been turned against me, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The breaking point came one Friday night. I was sitting on the couch trying to distract myself with a movie when a loud bang rattled my windows. I jumped up, heart racing, and rushed outside. There, on my driveway, was a brick. Wrapped around it with duct tape was a note, "Drop the lawsuit or else." My hands shook as I dialed 911. Within minutes, flashing lights painted the street blue and red. Sheriff Carson himself showed up, his face grim as he examined the brick. This just went from HOA drama to criminal harassment. And I'll tell you something, this isn't just neighborhood politics anymore. These people are desperate. I swallowed hard. "Do you think Karen?" He cut me off. "I can't say who, but I've seen this before. When HOAs start messing with property values and money, they'll do anything to shut people up." The next morning, David called me. "I've been contacted by someone," he said carefully. "An agent." My pulse quickened. "FBI?" He paused. "Yes. They've been hearing complaints about your HOA, missing funds, rigged votes, shady foreclosures, and your case just put you on their radar." I sat there stunned. The FBI? Over my vinyl windows? It sounded absurd, but after that brick, nothing surprised me anymore. The HOA, meanwhile, doubled down. Karen sent me an official letter claiming that because of my disruptive lawsuit, I was banned from attending community events. When I showed up at the pool with a friend, the security guard stopped me. "Sorry, ma'am, HOA rules, you're on the restricted list." I wanted to scream. I pay dues like everyone else. This is my neighborhood too. But instead, I just walked away, my fists clenched, reminding myself, document everything. They're digging their own grave. At the next HOA meeting, David insisted we attend.
The room was tense, whispers rippling through the crowd as we walked in. Karen sat at the head of the table, her smile tight, eyes burning with hostility. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "if it isn't our resident troublemaker and her attorney." I opened my mouth to reply, but David beat me to it. "Cut the theatrics, Mrs. Mitchell. We're here because this board has violated its own bylaws, engaged in fraudulent activity, and harassed my client. And soon, a federal investigation will prove it." Gasps filled the room. Karen's face flushed crimson. You think you can threaten me?" she snapped. "You'll regret this. People who fight the board never win." David leaned across the table, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "We'll see about that." Leaving that meeting, I felt a strange mix of fear and strength. They hated me. They wanted me gone. But for the first time, I could see cracks in their armor. And those cracks were about to widen. Because the very next week, 2 black SUVs rolled into our neighborhood. Out stepped men in suits, sunglasses glinting in the sun. They weren't sheriffs. They were federal agents. Whispers spread like wildfire. Neighbors peeked out their blinds, watching as the agents walked up to the HOA office and carried out boxes of files. Karen tried to act unfazed, but her face said it all. She was rattled. And me? For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. But as I stood at my window that night watching those black SUVs disappear down the street, a chill ran down my spine. Because if the FBI was involved, then Karen and her board weren't just bullies. They were criminals. And criminals don't go down without a fight.
They say the truth always comes out, but no one tells you how ugly it looks when it finally does. That week, my neighborhood felt like a movie set. Black SUVs parked outside the HOA office, men in suits knocking on doors, neighbors whispering behind curtains. The FBI wasn't subtle, and everyone knew why they were there. And at the center of it all was Karen Mitchell, our self-proclaimed Queen Bee, finally starting to sweat. I'll never forget the look on her face at that next HOA meeting. Usually she walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking, pearls gleaming. But this time, her smile was too tight, her hands fidgeted, and her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. David sat beside me, calm as ever, his briefcase at his feet. He leaned over and whispered, "Watch closely. This is what it looks like when power starts to crack." The meeting started, and for the first time, Karen's voice trembled. She tried to talk about landscaping budgets and pool hours, but no one was listening. Everyone wanted answers. "Is it true?" one neighbor demanded. "Did the FBI really take our records?" "Are we losing our money?" another shouted. Karen slammed her gavel down. "Order! This board has done nothing wrong. These accusations are baseless." But the crowd wasn't buying it, and neither was I. Later that night, I got a call from Sheriff Carson. His tone was serious. "Ma'am, I thought you should know. The FBI uncovered some interesting things. Your HOA has been foreclosing on multiple properties, not just yours, buying them back cheap, flipping them. Looks like a money scheme. And from the looks of it, Karen's right in the middle." I felt my stomach twist. So I was just a pawn? "More like an example," he said grimly. "She wanted to scare the rest of the neighborhood into falling in line. Problem is, she picked the wrong person." For a moment, I felt vindicated, but that feeling didn't last long. Because the next morning, I woke up to something that shook me more than any foreclosure notice ever could. My best friend in the neighborhood, Victoria, Someone who'd stood by me through the fines, who'd even helped me take photos of the harassment, was standing on Karen's porch, laughing with her, whispering like they were old friends. My heart sank. Later that day, I confronted her. "Victoria, what the hell are you doing at Karen's house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She crossed her arms, her smile sharp. "I think you're taking this too far. The HOA is just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. You're the one dragging us through the mud." I blinked in disbelief. "Are you serious? They're stealing from us. They tried to take my house. You saw the proof." Her smirk didn't fade. "Maybe I saw what you wanted me to see." And with that, she walked away. That betrayal cut deeper than any fine ever could. Because if Karen had gotten to Victoria, who else had she gotten to? That night, I told David. He frowned, tapping his pen against his notebook. "Not surprising, Karen's desperate. She's probably making deals, promising favors, anything to keep her little kingdom intact. Don't let it shake you." But it did, because suddenly the line between friend and foe blurred. Days later, the FBI called me in for a formal interview. Sitting across from those agents, I felt both small and powerful at the same time. "Tell us everything," one of them said, sliding a recorder across the table. So I did. The approval letter, the fines, the foreclosure, the brick with the note, the emails David uncovered, every detail. When he finished, the agent leaned back and exchanged a look with his partner. "This lines up with what we're seeing. Kickbacks, rigged votes, misuse of funds. It's bigger than just your HOA. It's a pattern across multiple neighborhoods, and Karen Mitchell might just be the thread that unravels the whole thing." Hearing that sent chills down my spine. My little window problem was part of something much larger. But just when I thought the tide was turning, Karen played her boldest card yet. One evening, I came home to find another notice taped to my door. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the county. "Noise complaints filed. Violation of community standards. Fine, $1,000. Noise complaints? I sat on my couch alone most nights with Netflix. I didn't even own a stereo system. David shook his head when I showed him. "She's weaponizing every channel she can. This is desperation, plain and simple. But remember, every false complaint, every fake violation, it only strengthens our case." But still, the stress was eating me alive. My hands shook constantly, I jumped at every knock on the door, and I barely slept. But then, a glimmer of hope. At the next hearing, the judge reviewed the foreclosure process. David presented the approval letter, the fraudulent emails and photos of the harassment. Karen tried to argue, her voice rising, her face red, but the judge wasn't having it. Finally, the judge leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Mitchell, this foreclosure appears to be unlawful. We'll be freezing any further action until this case is resolved." It was just a temporary reprieve, but to me, it felt like the first real victory. Karen, though, looked like she was about to explode. And that's when I realized a cornered Karen was the most dangerous kind of Karen. That night, as I locked my doors and checked my windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. The FBI was circling. The judge had clipped her wings, and her allies were slipping away. But Karen wasn't done yet. And when she finally made her next move, it would change everything. They say pressure makes diamonds, but in my neighborhood, it made monsters. By now, the entire community was divided. Half the neighbors whispered about corruption and secretly rooted for me. The other half clung to Karen like she was some kind of queen protecting their castle. It felt like I was living in two different neighborhoods, one where people dropped off casseroles at my door to show quiet support, and another where I found trash tossed onto my lawn at night. And through it all,
Karen kept pushing. The intimidation escalated fast. First, my tires were slashed, all 4 of them, on a rainy Monday morning before work. I stood there drenched, staring at the flat rubber, my chest tight with rage. Then came the phone calls, always from blocked numbers. "You don't belong here. Drop the lawsuit. You think the FBI will save you? They won't." I'd hang up shaking, my stomach in knots. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. Sheriff Carson was practically living in our neighborhood at this point. When I reported the slashed tires, he crouched beside my car, his face grim. "This is escalating fast," he muttered. "I'll add extra patrols, but listen, stay sharp. Karen's losing control, and when people like her lose control, they get reckless." I nodded, clutching my arms tight against the cold drizzle. "I just want my life back." He gave me a sad smile. "You'll get it, but not without scars." The next HOA meeting was pure chaos. I almost didn't go, but David insisted. "We need to be seen. Every meltdown she has in public strengthens your case." So I went, and he was right. The moment I walked in, Karen's face twisted with fury. She slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed through the room. "You don't belong here," she shouted, pointing at me. "You're poisoning this community." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few neighbors stood up to defend me. "She has every right to be here, Karen," one man yelled. "She's exposing the truth," a woman added. Karen's eyes darted wildly, her control slipping. "The FBI is lying. They're after me because they hate strong women." David calmly stood and set down a thick folder of documents. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, they're after you because you embezzled over $200,000 from this HOA and used foreclosure fines to cover it up." The room exploded, people shouting, some standing up, others trying to leave. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again. And then she did something I'll never forget. She stood, pointed directly at me, and screamed, "You ruined everything! You'll pay for this!" Her voice cracked, echoing off the walls. Security had to escort her out as neighbors filmed on their phones. That was the moment everyone knew the crown had cracked. But the drama didn't end there. 2 nights later, I heard shouting outside. When I opened my blinds, I saw a group of neighbors gathered on Karen's lawn, waving their HOA bills in the air. "Where's our money, Karen?" one man yelled. "You lied to us," another screamed. Karen stood on her porch, her hair wild, shouting back, "I did this for you, for the community. Don't you understand?" The scene spiraled fast. Someone threw a plastic chair, dogs barked, kids cried, and then red and blue lights flashed as Sheriff Carson pulled up with 2 deputies. He stepped out, hands raised. "Enough! Everyone, go home! This is not the way!" But Karen wasn't done. She marched down her porch steps and jabbed a finger into Carson's chest. "You're all against me! Even you, Sheriff! You'll regret this!" The crowd gasped. Carson's jaw clenched. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you calm down before this turns into something worse." Karen sneered. "Arrest me then! Arrest me for caring about my neighborhood!" And for a split second, I thought he might. His hand hovered near his cuffs, his deputies tense, but instead, he shook his head. "Not tonight, but soon," he said quietly. That confrontation shook the whole community. By the next morning, the story had spread beyond our gates. Local news vans lined the street, reporters knocking on doors asking neighbors for quotes. Karen tried to spin it, painting herself as the victim of a personal vendetta, but nobody was buying it anymore. Even Victoria, my so-called friend, stopped returning her calls. The woman who once smirked at me now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. The walls around Karen were crumbling, but that only made her more dangerous. One night, as I was locking up, I caught a shadow near my backyard fence. My heart stopped. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911, when the figure stepped forward. It was Sheriff Carson. Didn't mean to scare you, but I needed to warn you, the FBI's about to make their move. And when they do, Karen's not going to go quietly. Be ready. I swallowed hard. Ready for what? His eyes were grim. For a storm. And he was right, because the storm was coming. And when it finally hit, it would shake the entire neighborhood to its core. They say pride comes before the fall, but in Karen's case, it came with sirens, handcuffs, and a neighborhood full of witnesses. By the time summer rolled around, our community didn't feel like a community anymore. Neighbors avoided each other, the pool sat empty, and every mailbox was stuffed with angry flyers, some supporting me, others defending Karen. It was like living in a civil war all over vinyl windows. But beneath the surface, the FBI had been working quietly. And when they finally moved, they didn't just move on Karen, they moved on the entire HOA board. It started early on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee when I heard the low rumble of engines outside. Black SUVs again. I peeked through my blinds as agents in jackets marked FBI poured out, heading straight for Karen's house. Neighbors clustered on their lawns, whispering, phones in hand, recording every second. Moments later, Karen appeared on her porch in a silk robe, shouting, waving her arms. "This is harassment! I'm innocent! You can't do this to me!" Her voice cracked as the agents read her rights. When the cuffs clicked around her wrists, the crowd gasped. Some cheered quietly, others just stared. And me? I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. It was really happening. But Karen wasn't going down without one last scene. As they led her down the steps, she caught sight of me standing in my driveway. Her eyes blazed with hatred. This is your fault," she screamed, thrashing against the agent's grip. "You'll regret this. You haven't seen the last of me." For a moment, the street was silent. Everyone's eyes darted between her and me. And then Sheriff Carson stepped forward, shaking his head. "Karen Mitchell, you're finished. Time to face the consequences." The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others muttered, but no one defended her, not even Victoria. The next days were a whirlwind. News crews flooded our neighborhood, cameras capturing every angle of Karen's downfall. Headlines read, "HOA president arrested in $200,000 fraud scheme. FBI busts corruption ring in gated community. Homeowners celebrate as tyrannical HOA falls." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But then came the bombshell. At the town hall hearing, the FBI laid out everything. Karen and the board had been misappropriating funds for years, funneling money into personal accounts, using bogus fines to cover shortages, foreclosing on properties to resell them. And mine? Mine had just been the latest in a long line. One of the agents even said, without her persistence, this scheme might have gone on unchecked for years. I sat there stunned. My little fight over windows had blown the lid off a criminal empire. But as satisfying as it wasn't over. Because Karen had cut deals behind the scenes. Emails showed she'd been paying off certain neighbors, offering discounted dues for loyalty. One of those names stopped me cold. Victoria. My supposed best friend had been on her payroll the whole time. When I confronted her outside the hearing, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. "It's not what you think," she muttered. I left bitterly. "It's exactly what I think. You sold me out for a few bucks off your dues." Her face flushed red, but she said nothing. She just walked away, shoulders slumped like a dog with its tail between its legs. And in that moment, I realized something. I'd lost a friend, sure, but I'd gained something more important: the truth. By the end of the hearings, the entire HOA board was removed. The FBI seized their accounts, and the county froze their authority. A new management company was appointed, one that swore transparency and fairness. David walked out of the courthouse with me, a rare smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "Not only are they gone, you've got damages coming, a settlement, maybe even more." I blinked at him. "Damages? You mean money?" He nodded. "They tried to steal your house. They cost you months of hell. And once the judge sees the evidence, I wouldn't be surprised if you walk away with a hefty check." And he was right. Weeks later, I sat in that same courthouse as the judge banged the gavel and announced, "Judgment in favor of the homeowner. HOA to pay $75,000 in damages. Windows to remain as approved." The room erupted in whispers. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard the rest. $75,000. And my windows. I'd won. Walking out of that courthouse, sunlight warm on my face, I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost cried. Karen was gone. The HOA was gutted. My house was safe. But even in that victory, I knew this fight had changed me forever. Because when you stand up to people like Karen, you don't just win money. You win yourself back. But little did I know, Karen wasn't done trying to make noise, even from behind bars.
They say when you cut off the head of a snake, it still writhes for a while. And that was Karen, writhing, bitter, trying to claw back power even from a jail cell. After the court's judgment, I thought it was over. I thought I could finally rest, enjoy my home, and maybe even sit by the window without feeling like someone was watching me. But Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. A few weeks after her arrest, strange things started happening. Anonymous letters slipped into mailboxes, smearing my name. Flyers accusing me of framing an innocent woman. Fake social media accounts popped up, spewing lies about me and David. At first, I brushed it off, but then my neighbor, Mrs. Lopez, knocked on my door late one evening, holding a flyer. "Sweetheart," she said, voice trembling, "these look like they came from Karen." I frowned. "Karen's in jail." She nodded slowly. "Yes, but she's got friends, and they're trying to scare you." I'll admit, for a moment, fear crept back in. Was I going to live in this nightmare forever? But this time, I didn't crumble. I called Sheriff Carson. When he arrived, he looked at the flyer and shook his head. "Don't worry, FBI's already tracking this. Karen's been sending instructions to people on the outside. She's not as clever as she thinks." Sure enough, within days, agents traced the smear campaign back to her. The judge wasn't amused. At her follow-up hearing, they tacked on more charges: attempted witness intimidation, obstruction. And just like that, Karen's dreams of a cushy plea deal vanished. The neighborhood, meanwhile, began to heal. With the corrupt HOA gone, people actually started talking to one another again. Kids played outside without parents worrying about some ridiculous fine. The new management group fixed the pool, cleaned the sidewalks, and, this was the best part, sent out newsletters explaining exactly where the money went. For the first time in years, it felt like a community again. And me? I used part of my $75,000 settlement to repaint the house, plant flowers in the front yard, and yes, sit proudly behind my vinyl windows. Every time sunlight streamed through them, I smiled, a small reminder that I'd fought and won. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I stood on my porch sipping iced tea when Sheriff Carson stopped by. "You know," he said, tipping his hat, "I've seen a lot of folks get bullied by HOAs. Most of them just give in.
But you stood your ground." I laughed softly. "I didn't have a choice." He shook his head. "No, you did, and you chose to fight. That's what makes the difference." His words stuck with me. Because he was right. Karen Mitchell would spend years behind bars, her empire of fines and threats reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Virginia eventually moved away too ashamed to stay. And honestly, I didn't miss her. But me, I stayed. Because my house wasn't just wood and vinyl and windows anymore. It was a symbol that no matter how powerful or intimidating people may seem, truth and persistence can break them down. So to anyone listening, here's the lesson I learned the hard way. Don't ever let bullies, whether they hide behind HOA rules or anything else, decide your worth. Stand your ground, fight back, and one day you'll look out your own window and realize you won. And that, my friends, is how a $12,000 fine turned into a $75,000 victory, and the downfall of a woman who thought she was untouchable. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply standing tall while your enemy falls.